let's look at the complete anatomy of the heart. Now, having looked at the topography of the heart, now let us now look into the detailed gross anatomy of the human heart. So, in this video, we are going to look at the heart chambers, we'll look at the heart valves, different openings or ostia, and we'll look at key landmarks of the heart. Let's start with the chambers. Now, the heart is a muscular organ made up of 4 chambers. 4 chambers. So what are these chambers? So we have 2 cavities here called the atria, right? So one is on the left and one on the right. So on the left we have the left atrium, and on the right we have the right atrium. So these 2 chambers basically are the receiving points. They receive blood into the heart from outside of the heart. We have here the right atrium, and here we have the left atrium. Also, we have 2 other chambers called ventricles. So here we have the right ventricle, and here we have the left ventricle. So now let us look at each of these chambers separately in a more detailed manner. Now let's start with the right atrium. So the right atrium has got 5 openings. 5 openings inside this right atrium, or we say ostium or ostia. So one of the openings of the right atrium is the opening of the superior vena cava. Now, the superior vena cava is basically draining blood from the upper parts of the body, head, neck, and the upper limbs, right? So, the superior vena cava opening, and key thing to know about the superior vena cava opening, this one, is that it has no valve. Then, let's look at another opening, which is the opening of the inferior vena cava. Now, the inferior vena cava is draining blood from the lower parts of the body. So basically, the abdomen, the pelvic region, and the lower limbs. So all these veins, all these tributaries drain blood into the inferior vena cava, and the inferior vena cava open this, and the inferior vena cava drain the blood into the right atrium. And the opening, the inferior vena cava has got a valve. So this inferior vena cava has a valve, and this valve is called the eustachian valve. Now another opening into the right atrium 3 is the opening of coronary sinus. And this one also has got valve in the right atrium. So the coronary sinus opening also has some valves. So this is actually draining blood from the cardiac muscles. So venous drainage from the cardiac muscles is being drained directly into the right atrium via this coronary sinus. So also has got valves. And these valves are called, or this valve is called the Thebesian valve. The 4th opening in the right atrium is opening of the small cardiac veins. So these are draining blood directly from the myocardium and then draining directly into the right atrium. So opening of the small cardiac veins. 5th opening in the right atrium is the right atrioventricular orifice. Right atrioventricular orifice. So this is basically what I'm talking about. The opening between the right atrium and the right ventricle. So this opening allows blood to move from the right atrium and go into the right ventricle. Now this opening also has got valves, and this valve is called the tricuspid valve. So here has got valve, and the valve is called the tricuspid valve. So the tricuspid valve, that means it has three cusps, right? So what are these three cusps? We have one, the anterior. So we have the anterior cusps. We have the posterior cusps, and then we have the septal cusps. So the tricuspid, three cusps, anterior, posterior, and the septa, this one. So it has three cusps, anterior, posterior, and the septa cusps. So this opens and allow blood to move from the right atrium into the right ventricle. So these are basically the 5 openings we can find in the right atrium. Also, there is something very interesting about the right atrium. We have something in the right atrium called the sinoatrial node, the SA node. So the SA node is basically the natural pacemaker. So this is basically what generates electricity or electric currents for the heart to contract. But we'll look at this in a more detailed lecture when we look at the physiology of cardiac conduction. Then in the right atrium also, we have something we call fossa ovalis and other basic indentation here in the right atrium. Then also inside this right atrium, we have something we call the pectinate muscles. Pectinate muscles, very important to know. Pectinate muscles. So to clearly see all these structures in the right atrium, we have a well detailed and clear diagram on our website, which you can basically go and download and study it for free. So that is all for the right atrium. Now let's go into the right ventricle. So the right ventricle has got 2 basic openings. So we have the right atrioventricular orifice, the same one, right atrioventricular orifice. Right atrioventricular orifice, which has this valve called the tricuspid valve. Then also we have this opening in the right ventricle that is leading into the pulmonary trunk here. Opening of the pulmonary trunk, This opening also has got valve. This valve is a semilunar valve, right? It's a semilunar valve. Also has got 2, so it has valve. This also has got valve, and this is the tricuspid. The right atrioventricular has got tricuspid valve, and the opening of the pulmonary trunk has got the semilunar valve. So it has 3 semilunar cusps. So this semilunar valve also has got 3 cusps, right? So we have right, left, and anterior cusps, right? So right semilunar cusps, left, and then the anterior, just like here. So basically something like, so let's do something like this. It has 3 cusps. So we have, let's say, the anterior, then we have the right and the left semilunar cusps. So this is the structure of this valve here. Then let's now look into the internal structure, the endocardium of this right ventricle. So in the right ventricle, we have some ridges here inside of the internal wall of the right ventricle. So these ridges are called the trabeculae cardiae. Inside of the right ventricles, we have the papillary muscles. Right? Papillary muscles. So basically, we have 3 of them. So these 3 papillary muscles are attaching to the cusps of these valves, right? Now, attaching to the cusps of these valves and the papillary muscles, we have something we call the chordae tendineae. Chordae tendineae. So, papillary muscles, and chordae tendineae. Right? Chordae tendineae. So the papillary muscles and the chordae tendineae are attached here to the cusps. So each of them corresponds to one cusp. So that's why we have the anterior papillary muscles, the posterior papillary muscles, and the septal papillary muscles attaching to the valves. So they are ensuring the integrity of these valves so that the valves opens when needed and closes when not needed to be opened. So now let's look at the left atrium. So, unlike the right atrium, the left atrium has got 5 openings. Now, let's look at these. What are these 5 openings? So, basically, in the left atrium, something unique is happening. Now, the veins that are draining blood into the left atrium are draining oxygenated blood. Unlike in the right atrium, where deoxygenated blood is drained by these veins. So, what are these veins? Basically, we have 4 of them. So, 4 pulmonary veins. 4 pulmonary veins. So, 2 from each lungs. And they all have openings in the left atrium. Also, which other opening do we have? We have the left atrioventricular orifice. Left atrioventricular orifice. Now, that is basically the opening between the left atrium and the left ventricle. So this opening has got valve. Mind you, the pulmonary veins, they have no valves, unlike here the inferior vena cava that is having the eustachian valve. So the left atrioventricular orifice has got a valve, and this valve is called the bicuspid valve or the mitral valve. So this valve is bicuspid or the mitral valve. The bicuspid valve or the mitral valve. Now, bicuspid because it has 2 cusps, right? So what are these cusps? Like here, the tricuspid, we have 3 cusps. Here we have only 2 cusps. So what are these? We have the anterior cusps, and we have the posterior cusps. So key difference to note. The tricuspid valve has got the septal cusps, but the bicuspid or the mitral valve has no septal cusps, but it has the anterior cusps and the posterior cusps. Now, that is that for the left atrium. It receives oxygenated blood from the lungs and then sends this blood into the left ventricle via this atrioventricular orifice closed here up by the bicuspid or the mitral valve. Let us look at the left ventricle. So the left ventricle is the thickest of the ventricles. It has a very thick wall because of its pressure requirements. It's supposed to pump blood into the entire systemic circulation. So that is why its wall is thicker than that of the right ventricle. So let's look here inside the internal structure of the left ventricle. Also, we have the trabeculae carneae forming the internal ridges, which we have got a more detailed diagram on our website you can download. Then also we have the papillary muscles. Now, you know already that these papillary muscles are coming to attach to these cusps of the valves. So papillary muscles, and then we have these cords holding the valves called the chordae tendineae. The chordae tendineae, the same. But here we have, of course, anterior and posterior papillary muscles attaching to these cusps to ensure that the valves open when needed and close when they are supposed to be closed. Also in the left ventricle, we have another orifice or opening here between the ventricle and the aorta. So this aortic orifice, the opening of the aorta, is opening directly into the left ventricle. So this aortic orifice also has got a valve, and this valve is called a semilunar valve. It's also a semilunar valve. So we are now looking at the left ventricle. So the left ventricle, we say, has got two openings. The left atrioventricular orifice, which is formed by this mitral valve that is having two cups. So we call it the bicuspid valve. And these two bicuspid valves are the anterior cups and the posterior cups. So also here we have the tendineae muscle. We have the papillary muscles and the chordae tendineae, which are attaching directly to these valves. Also, we have the opening of the aorta in the left ventricle. Now, the aortic opening has got a valve, and this valve is a semilunar valve. Semilunar valve. A semilunar valve, right? Now, semilunar valve, but it also has three cups. Three cups. Now, what are these three cups? So, like we had here, for the right ventricle, where we have the semilunar valve for the pulmonary trunk, has got the left, the right, and the anterior. Here, we have three copses, but the copses are right, left, and instead of anterior, here now we have posterior cups. So basically, this valve is supposed to open this way so that blood from the left ventricle can go into the aortic trunk, ascend the aorta, and into the systemic circulation. So this is basically the complete gross anatomy of the heart. Now let's look here again. Let's look at the overview again. The heart is a muscular organ made up of 4 chambers. Now, 2 upper chambers and 2 lower chambers here. From our topography lesson, we learned that this portion of the heart is the apex of the heart. And if we look at here, this part of the heart is regarded as the base of the heart. Now, these chambers, we have 2 categories. We have atria and ventricles. Now, the atria are receiving blood in the heart, whereas the ventricles are sending blood away from the heart. So in the right atrium, we say we have 5 openings. We have opening of the superior vena cava, opening of the inferior vena cava, we have coronary sinus, then we have here opening of the small cardiac veins, and opening of the right atrioventricular orifice. So the coronary sinus, the inferior vena cava, and the atrioventricular orifice, they have got valves. This is to just prevent backflow of the blood from where they are coming from. Also here, we have in the right ventricle, we said, we have the trabeculocardiae. That means these ridges formed by the right ventricle. You will see a more detailed structure. Then here, we have the atrioventricular orifice. The right has got this valve called the tricuspid valve. It has 3 copses. What are these copses? We said we have the anterior, posterior, and the septal cups. Then we also have the pulmonary trunk. Now, the pulmonary trunk also has got a valve, and this is opening directly into the right ventricle. This valve is a semilunar valve. It also has 3 copses, the left, right, and the anterior. Then we come to the left ventricle, the left atrium. In the left atrium, we have 4 pulmonary veins opening directly into the left atrium that are carrying oxygenated blood. Unlike on the left atrium, on the right atrium, where we have deoxygenated blood. And also we have this orifice here between the left atrium and the left ventricle called the atrioventricular orifice. Left atrioventricular orifice, but it has a valve, and this valve has just 2 copses, and this cups is called the mitral valve or the bicuspid valve. Then in the left ventricle, we said the wall is much more thicker than that of the right ventricle because of each pressure requirements to pump blood into the entire system in circulation. Also, internal structurally is more like in the right ventricle. Then we have the papillary muscles, and then we have the chordae tendineae that are attached directly to these valves to ensure the integrity of the valves are maintained. And also we have the opening into the aortic trunk, which is basically going to allow blood to move from the left ventricle into the aortic trunk, and then blood goes into the systemic circulation. So these valves are very important to understand because any malformation of these valves will cause serious problem on the heart. Now, I hope you've been able to understand clearly the complete gross anatomy of the heart, starting from all the chambers and all the valvular structure. So if there's any way you've learned from this video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. In the next video, we will start looking at the systemic and the pulmonary circulation. Until then, see you in the next video.